And these vessels that aren't operating during the winter look for locations where they can safely dock and take winter repairs. So they do that at the Port of Milwaukee.
Mary, you remember, what was it, about 8 or 10 years ago, our Rotary Club toured the Stewart Court. It's a 1,000-foot ship.
I think I had to miss that one.
So Mary, next time you're over in the Harbor District, if you're at UWM School of Freshwater Sciences, all winter long from Freshwater Plaza, you can look on the opposing side of the river and see one of the largest vessels on the Great Lakes. She'll be with us all winter.
All right. Well, I'll make sure I get down there.
And Tom, you'll be interested to know that Interlake, which owns the court, also just announced they just bought the SS Badger in Manitowoc, the long-running historic ferry service. They just bought it a week or two ago.
You know, I read that in the paper. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Is that the one that dumps all the ash into the lake?
Not anymore.
Not anymore, but you are correct historically.
Okay, so it's...
All right, I'm going to get us started here, and I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone.
It's important to maintain my Rotary membership now more than ever because Rotary is an organization that is dedicated to helping people in the community. It's apolitical in nature, and it does good things to help citizens. And I think that what could be more important than having something that unites us in a period of really strong division in this country.
Membership is choice, right? Who do I want and choose to engage with? How can I contribute and be part of something bigger than myself?
Why I'm staying in Rotary and why I've stayed has evolved over the years, and I think the main aspect of that is I truly enjoy the fellowship. It's a great group of people. It's a bunch of community leaders that you would never have the opportunity to spend an hour with every Tuesday.
That sense you have in the room of people who want to be part of something that moves the world forward in a meaningful way, it really is impactful from the person to person and then also country to country.
Maintaining my Rotary membership today is more important than ever. What Rotary offers when it's not a pandemic, the value of Rotary is critical. The resources, the people brought together to connect together to provide value to our community is all the more important today than ever.
Rotary is like family, and you don't leave your family when times are tough. You do your part, and our part is paying our dues and staying as involved as we can right now during this pandemic.
Welcome and Happy New Year from the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I am Club President Darren Miller, President and owner of JM Construction. And as we do at the start of every program, we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, Adam Tyndall-Schlitt, Director of Port Milwaukee, will be giving us our invocation. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. President. The invocation today I'm going to use as a New Year's prayer is adapted from the Reverend Marcy Shremeta. As dawn breaks on 2021, let us give thanks for all that we hold dear, our health, our family, and our friends. Let us release our grudges, our anger, and our pain. Let us live each day in a most loving way. Let us serve all who are in need, regardless of race, color, or creed. Let us help lead the world from darkness to light, from falsehood to truth, and from wrong to right. Let us remember that we are all one, embracing all and discriminating against none. I wish you all a year filled with peace, prosperity, health, and love.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks for being here today. We'll kick this off with a bit of club business. I want to say thank you to all of the Rotarians who were featured in our compilation video series of Rotary Now More Than Ever. That series is played prior to the program start today. We have all been adapting, of course, to a variety of struggles throughout the pandemic, but we've certainly been encouraged and gratified to hear that many of our members believe in Rotary now more than ever. In the midst of the global pandemic, we have heard across the organization that our members are missing small interactions and new connections that are formed at in-person events. While we cannot wait to get back to meeting in person, in the interim, we are introducing pairing connections. Sign up each month to be randomly paired with another Rotary member. It will then be up to the individuals to schedule a virtual or socially distanced meetup or meetups throughout that month. New matches will be made each following month thereafter, so you can connect with a different member each month. Get to know someone new or reconnect with an existing friend. Participation, of course, is optional, but strongly encouraged to continue growing valuable relationships within our organization. Rotarians recently received a request via email and US mail to contribute to the RCM Scholarship Fund, and donations will continue to be welcomed. As a club, we are proud of the success that we have achieved to date with our students. Since its start in 2009, 25 Milwaukee students, many the first in their family to attend college, have graduated with the support of our scholarship program. These graduates, along with 21 students currently enrolled in the program, have felt firsthand Rotary's commitment to them and their future through a financial scholarship, educational programming, and mentorship. Students of varied backgrounds have studied subjects ranging from engineering to nursing to art and finance. Today, you'll find these scholars working at Aurora Sinai Medical Center, Freighter, Rockwell Automation, the state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee County, and the city of Milwaukee. This Thursday, our first snack program of 2021 will feature 3 of our current RCM scholars: Jose Uribe, UW Whitewater, Anthony Pittman from UW-Madison, and Dayanara Gonzalez from Mount Mary University. They will discuss the importance of the RCM Scholarship Program and the impact that COVID-19 has had on their education. So please tune in for that on Thursday. We had 20 Rotarians participate in the last book read and discussion facilitated by Paula Pennebaker, recently retired executive director with the YWCA. I was one, and I think I speak for others when I say it was time well invested. Rotarians are smart and thoughtful, which makes for engaging and thought-provoking conversation. I hope you will join us when we discuss Isabel Wilkerson's newest bestseller, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. We will meet 6 times beginning Wednesday, January 13th at 4 p.m. See today's email for more information. The Rotary Person of the Year Committee is accepting nominations for the 2021 Rotary Person of the Year. Nominations for the award should be individuals who, through their profession, have made the community a better place to live and work, and have shown outstanding leadership in the advancement of ideas, products, or services. If you'd like to submit a one-page nomination, please send it to info@milwaukeerotary.com. The deadline to submit is January 14th, 2021. The Rotary Club will celebrate the award recipient at a May or June Rotary meeting. The office is also preparing a 2021 club roster, which will be mailed to you around the 1st of February. If you have a chance this week, please go to the members section on the Rotary website and make sure the information we have for you is up to date. Send any changes to Michelle, and if you need help logging in, Michelle would be happy to help with that as well. And now, Mary McCormick will introduce our speaker for today.
Mary, you're muted.
Okay. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome back filmmaker Chip Duncan, founder of the Duncan Entertainment Group. Now in its 36th year as a Milwaukee-based documentary production company, the Duncan Entertainment Group has produced more than 40 long-form films for a variety of platforms and networks with distribution in more than 130 countries. In addition to mainstream international locations, Chip Duncan has specialized in photographing crisis zones and the locations in need of humanitarian assistance, including Afghanistan, Darfur, Ethiopia, Myanmar, and post-earthquake Haiti. Duncan's writing and photography are featured in numerous books, including a C.S. Lewis biography called The Magic Never Ends, the short story collection Half a Reason to Die, and the coffee table books Enough to Go Around and Inspiring Change. His new book, Owasso Village, will be released in May of this year, and his 4-part television series, Magnificent Madness, will be released in the fall. Among the distinguishing features of his career as a documentary filmmaker, Chip has interviewed or photographed 6 former US presidents. And that's what we're going to hear about today. So Chip, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you very much, Mary, and thanks to Milwaukee Rotary for having me back again. I love living in Milwaukee. It's been a long career here, and I still enjoy being part of this community. So thank you for having me. About this time last year, pre-pandemic, I was at home working out on my exercise bike, and the morning show was the topic. It's a TV series, and it was the topic of Terry Gross's Fresh Air. And Terry had Reese Witherspoon on the air. And I'll never forget it. I was sitting there biking away, listening to the radio show, and the topic of the morning show was Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon talking about what it takes to be a TV anchor for a major network morning show. And Aniston's character said, "Yeah, I've interviewed 5 US presidents, and you don't get this seat unless you've done that." And at the time I thought, yeah, and I'm a schmuck on an exercise bike in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I've sat with 6 presidents. So I decided to put together a little program called Sitting with Presidents. And obviously my experience has been very different because I'm coming from a documentary background, but the time I've had with the different elected officials, both in the US and around the world, has been some of the most fascinating work of my career. And so to start with today, I'm going to play a clip from a PBS biography we did called Landslide, the Presidency of Herbert Hoover. This is a show we did in 2007 that aired nationwide and then also in several countries in Europe. And this film does not include any of the presidents that I've interviewed, but it includes one of the more interesting people we've learned a lot about in the past year as politics have unfolded here. Hoover has been referenced numerous times. So this is a brief clip just to give you some background on the Hoover presidency.
It was a time of prosperity and hope, a time of promise and expectation. When the robust presidential candidacy of Herbert Hoover began in 1928, America was riding waves of optimism and opportunity. The Republican Party even promoted the bold notion of eliminating poverty during the tenure of a Hoover presidency. Thanks to his unprecedented success in the mining business, his humanitarian leadership in response to World War I, and his 2 terms as Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover was among the most highly regarded men in America.
He seemed to fit the times in 28. Hoover was a landslide president. He had a mandate. He had a majority of people with him.
He had a sense of America as a special place in the world. He had a strong sense, if you will, of American exceptionalism.
He had more brains than most people, and he knew a lot more than most people about almost everything. And yet that wasn't enough.
4 years later, the nation and the world were mired in the worst depression in modern history.
In 32, 4 years later, he couldn't have been more out of the times. He seemed to be a man from another century by then.
The great paradox of Herbert Hoover was that he had a reputation, a justifiable reputation, as being the great humanitarian for his work in World War I and for his work even as Secretary of Commerce under Calvin Coolidge. He understood how if businesses were prosperous, the families who were dependent on the breadwinners who worked for those businesses would be better. But he could not get into his head the notion that the federal government had a role to play in direct humanitarian aid to hard-stricken families.
Hoover is a real object lesson in the limitations of intelligence, experience, and even attentiveness in an effective president.
By the time Herbert Hoover ran for re-election in 1932, nearly a quarter of the nation's workforce was unemployed. Millions of Americans had lost their life savings. Entire communities were starving. And the farm economy was beyond the brink of disaster.
Now the battle must be continued. We have yet to go a long ways and to capture many positions to restore agriculture and employment. But it can be made plain that if the strategy which we have established is maintained, and the battle not halted by change in the midst of action, we shall win.
Herbert Hoover had an unprecedented reputation for managing crisis and tapping into America's voluntary spirit. Yet in the face of an agricultural crisis, a stock market collapse, massive unemployment, and the failure of the international banking system, Herbert Hoover lost the confidence of the American people.
So it probably goes without saying that the little clip you saw there reflects a lot of the issues that we're faced with today, especially around the pandemic and the role of the federal government. One of the distinguishing features of our work with PBS on both this film and the three-part series called The Reagan Presidency, which you can now see on Amazon Prime. Among the distinguishing features is that we try to do our films objectively and feature voices from both sides. So when this film came out, we had the distinction of getting a very positive letter from Robert Reich, who you saw in that clip, about the film, and also from Margaret Hoover, who's an outspoken Republican commentator here in the US and the great granddaughter of Herbert Hoover. So I don't know if that's a win-win, but we certainly got positive response from both sides, if you will. The film that started our journey with public television and also is the one where 5 US presidents sat for interviews was a film we did and was released in the early 90s called Positive Thinking. And it's the story of Norman Vincent Peale. And part of what makes that film and Norman Vincent Peale relevant today is that the current president, Donald Trump, is a huge acolyte of Peale. He used to attend Marble Collegiate Church. He and his father were both big fans of Peale and his approach to the ministry. Peale's the author of the best-selling nonfiction book of all time, The Power of Positive Thinking. Rick Warren's book may have replaced that on the list, I'm not sure. But anyway, when we decided to do the Peale film, the first person we went after was Richard Nixon. And the reason was that Norman Vincent Peale was the minister who presided over the wedding of Nixon's daughter. And so Peale had gone to DC and performed the services for Nixon's daughter's wedding. We thought, well, if Nixon sits, it'd be great. Let's try to get him. We got him. And one of the first lessons I learned was once you have one, the rest want to say yes as well. So in the course of that film, we interviewed Nixon, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Ford. So I'm going to play a short clip from that film that shows them in action, and then tell you a couple of backstories about the people we interviewed. So this is from Positive Thinking.
If you lift up any page of the Bible and look through it with a light in the background, what do you see? You try it sometime. You will see toppling civilizations. You will see great white pillars against azure skies crashing in the dust of centuries. You will see marching troops and turbulent battle. And they said civilization's falling. That's what they said. All except the people who weren't upset. What'd they say? Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's it.
A small town minister who rose to the pinnacle of success and celebrity, Norman Vincent Peale was known to many as an exuberant pastor in the Dutch Reformed Church of America. He was shy, political, risk-taking, and pioneering in his use of the media. During a career that spanned more than 7 decades, Peale was revered by millions.
I don't think Dr. Peale's impact is limited to the 1950s, earlier or later. I think it's ongoing. I think what he said, what he represents, represents an important cultural shift in post-World War II America.
When any history is written of this century, or social changes, or self-analysis, or the practical application of theological principles, or oratorical skills, or the use of media, or the innovative approach to religion versus practical daily life, I think Dr. Peale's name will always be remembered, and also ways will be remembered favorably.
Just put your trust in God, do the best you can, get in there and fight for the good.
Well, I can remember the first time that I heard him. It was right after the war, or as the war was coming to an end. And I will always remember it for 2 reasons. One, because of the style. I mean, he stood up there without a note. He was eloquent. And second, because of the content. It wasn't hell, fire, and brimstone, striking fear into you and all that, but it was an upbeat, positive, strong, sturdy message.
He's also able to stand up in front of thousands of people and somehow make you feel, if you're in the audience or the congregation, make you feel as though he is having this personal conversation with you.
So if you're like me, you're probably looking at a clip going, whatever happened to David Hartman? And I am not in a position to tell you. A couple of quick backstories on the 5 presidents that are in this TV show. All of them had sought Peale's counsel as presidents, his religious counsel. Now, in my case, I don't happen to be a religious person, but that was at the core of the film, is the relationship between the presidents and Norman Vincent Peale became a big part of the film. And the other minister, of course, at the time that was well known for counseling presidents was Billy Graham. Billy Graham did not agree to an interview for this show. And it became kind of the dramatic meat of the documentary was that when Graham refused, it had to do with a meeting that Peale presided over at the Mayflower Hotel in the 1960 election, when Peale and a number of other ministers convened. Graham was supposed to show up and didn't, but they came up with a statement after that meeting that flew in the face of what we would consider right today, but it was the idea that Kennedy should not be president because he was a Catholic and he would somehow be beholden to the Pope. It was a turning point in Peale's career, a nosedive, kind of a classic crash and burn for a few years. And then out of the ashes of that statement came the power of positive thinking, and he more or less resurrected his career. Kennedy obviously went on to win. And of course, now we have a president-elect in Joe Biden, who's also Catholic. There were, in the process of interviewing these, there were a number of opportunities to sit with at different lengths of time. In the case of Richard Nixon, we interviewed him in his office in New Jersey. He had turned down Secret Service protection after he left office, so it was a sheriff's deputy that would drive him to and from his office every morning and then sit in the lobby. We literally just showed up, said hello, walked in his office, and we spent more than 2 hours with Nixon because it was the 1992 presidential campaign was taking place, and he wound up interviewing us at length about what was going on in Wisconsin. Did people want Bill Clinton in office? You know, what was the vibe politically? So we actually spent about 2 hours with Nixon. There is a photo that you can put up if you'd like. He, like all presidents, is inclined to do the handshake photograph. Most of my friends who've seen this over the years have accused me of faking it because it looks like he's one of those stands on the Washington Mall. The other photo, if you wouldn't mind putting it up, is a photo with Ronald Reagan. In the wider version of this photo, you can see that he's holding a baseball, and I'm holding a baseball right now. To give you a little backstory, when we knew we were going to interview these 5 presidents, Harry Dalton was the general manager of the Brewers at the time, and I called Harry Dalton and said, you know, we're going to be interviewing all these presidents. It'd be great to give them a gift. And the gift I chose was Milwaukee Brewers baseball signed by Paul Molitor, Jim Gantner, and Robin Yount, because they had just set the record for the longest tenure of 3 players on a major league team in the history of baseball. So you might say, well, how did I wind up with one? And it's because I gave one to Nixon, I gave one to Bush Sr., I gave one to Reagan, I gave one to Carter, and then when I got to Jerry Ford, in classic Jerry Ford style, I forgot the baseball. So I wound up with it. So I still have it here at my house after all these years. Now, the interviews that are in that film are obviously from a period of time long forgotten. Even the production styles have changed dramatically. So I'm going to play a clip from a more contemporary piece. This also has an interesting backstory, but we, in 2014, 2015, I built a lasting friendship and a very incredible positive relationship with the former Senate Majority Leader from Congress named George Mitchell. He was a senator from Maine. And George Mitchell he had promised he was only going to serve 2 terms, which he did. And he was then asked by Bill Clinton to join the Supreme Court. He turned down a Supreme Court position, said he felt he could do better work in other places. Clinton then tapped him as a negotiator for the Northern Ireland Peace Accord. And I got to know George fairly well. I went to a number of speaking engagements, including one that he gave at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And I listened to his life story, which is well told in a book called The Negotiator. And you may remember he negotiated the steroids agreement in Major League Baseball. He was on the board of, chairman of the board of Disney and FedEx and a number of things after leaving office. But his claim to fame is peace negotiations. Bush Jr. tapped him as a Middle East envoy, so did Obama. But the real heart of his journey was succeeding in negotiating peace in Northern Ireland. So it's a film we have not yet made. I tried, and my big idea, they don't all work, but my big idea at the time in 2015 was, let's try and interview George, which we did. And then it was, let's interview Bill and Hillary. They both played a major role in this peace process. And we felt at the time that the demo that we would create would help us with fundraising for the PBS broadcast. So far, we are still in that fundraising category. And in this case, I think the loss, Hillary's loss in the 2016 election probably hurt us because the negatives that were thrown at her campaign were ultimately reflective of the demo that we created. Nonetheless, we did interview Bill Clinton, we did interview Hillary Clinton for this demo, and long interviews that we will eventually use in the film. I'd like to play the demo for you here and just give you a little taste for what I think is a remarkable story about an American hero, George Mitchell.
The Irish Catholic minority in Northern Ireland felt economically, politically, and socially dispossessed being a part of the United Kingdom and having a society so stratified along religious lines.
There was a sense of inevitability of conflict. I remember very clearly an elderly woman, she could have been anybody's grandmother, came up to me and said, "We love you, Senator, we appreciate what you're trying to do, but you're wasting your time. We've been killing each other for centuries, and we're going to go on killing each other for centuries to come."
The Northern Ireland Protestants who wanted to stay part of the Union believed that Jerry Adams was a stalking horse for the IRA, and that there was you couldn't separate the political arm, the Sinn Féin, from the violent arm of the Irish Republican Army.
There was a long history of violence. The confrontations that they had previously involved shooting and bombing and demonstrating. There was very little civil discourse.
London was disengaged, Dublin was disengaged. It was very difficult to see how you could get the two sides together unless there was some intermediary. Bill became convinced that there was a role for the United States, and we needed to inject a mediator into the process, bring together both sides, and give them a chance to see whether or not they could start moving toward first a discussion and then a negotiation. And that's, of course, when he turned to George Mitchell.
He inspires confidence, he inspires trust, he's smart as a whip, and he is exceedingly results-oriented.
You get a lot of no's, a lot of no's. You've got 100 reasons why someone can't do anything. The yeses are few and far between, and the reasons why they can do something are even fewer and far between.
First of all, you have to be willing to keep trying, no matter how discouraging it is. And you have to overcome the natural cynicism and even fatalism that creeps into these efforts. And you have to keep looking for any advantage, any opening that you can use to get people back at a table, back talking together.
The Sinn Féin understood, particularly Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness understood, that if they kept this thing going, they were going to lose the people. But if they made a peace agreement, they could become their strongest advocates.
There are times and places and men and women who rise to the occasion, who, in Northern Ireland, ordinary men and women, who despite a history of conflict, rose to the occasion at a critical moment. Many of them paid dearly for it. Prominent figures lost their positions. Their parties declined as a consequence of the courage that they exhibited. But history will be kind to them in its judgment.
So this is a film that obviously we have not produced yet. I think the climate for fundraising might be a little improved at this point. And as you can tell from what you've seen here today, I'm an advocate for diplomacy. I believe very strongly as a journalist in presenting both sides and digging as deep as possible so that there's some substance to the kind of media that we have an opportunity to view. And in the case of the Northern Ireland Peace Accord, there are some significant changes going on today due to Brexit. And I think we're going to see something new coming out of Northern Ireland in the months ahead. So it's worth keeping your eye on. George Mitchell is still with us. Obviously, Bill and Hillary are still with us. Having interviewed and sat with a number of heads of state globally, several secretaries of state, and the 6 presidents we're talking about here today, I can tell you without question that the most difficult interview was Bill Clinton. We interviewed Bill and Hillary both in the Clinton Foundation offices in New York City, but each was about 3 months apart. So we weren't there, they weren't there at the same time. When we interviewed Bill Clinton, he walked in and it was literally all business right now. We sat down and started. My technique is that I will prep for the interview, and then on a legal pad, I'll usually have one word for each question that allows my memory to be jogged enough to ask that question so that I'm not constantly staring at my notes. And with Clinton, I had the 6 or 7 words on a big legal pad, but his presence was so intense, his eye contact was so intense, I literally felt that if I looked away, if I blinked, that I was going to somehow lose the concentration that he was bringing to it. So I made it through that interview without ever looking at my legal pad. By contrast, Hillary Clinton, who we did about 3 months later, was a delight. She walked into the room, shook hands, sat down, and immediately said, this was her icebreaker. She looked at me and she said, you know, I read your bio and it appears that you've made a lot of films on a lot of different subjects. Why did you choose this one? At which point I started breathing, which was nice. And it was a stunning moment because she took all of the energy and flipped it around so that we could have a conversation. She just, as an interviewer, I thought, what a great strategy, because she completely disarmed me. At any rate, I do have a few photos from those shoots. And if you could put up the first one here, this is yours truly with former Senator Mitchell. If you like political histories, I highly recommend his autobiography called The Negotiator. It's a terrific book. He also wrote a book on the Northern Ireland Accord called Making Peace that is a blueprint for how to negotiate in a crisis zone. The next photo is our crew in New York with President Clinton. The gentleman on the far left is Bob Huck. Bob works with me. He would be co-producing the show, and Bob and I have worked together for more than 25 years here in Milwaukee, and he's a delight to have as a colleague. So I wanted to show this picture. The next one is Bill Clinton with his chief of staff, and you'll see he's holding a big tag board with a bunch of campaign buttons on it. And I showed you the baseball earlier. So when we interviewed the first group of 5, we gave them all the baseball, except Ford, that is. For this, we were sitting around in the office going, okay, we need a gift for Bill Clinton. What should we give him? And he collects campaign buttons. And Bob Huck, who works with me, his uncle is a big collector of campaign memorabilia. So we called him and we put together this group of campaign buttons that are all Clinton campaigning here in Wisconsin. And as intense as he was when he walked in the door, as immediate as he was, sit down, let's do it, get it over with. The minute we gave him this gift, he sat back down and then spent another roughly 35, 40 minutes talking with us. And these campaign buttons now reside in his presidential library. And there are a number of buttons that you, as Wisconsin Rotarians, might remember, including cheese heads for Clinton. So he was delighted. It was as intense as the interview itself was. The post picture taking side was delightful. There's one more photo, and this is an image with Hillary, obviously, at the end of our interview. It's interesting having spent time with these people, each one very unique, very different in how they interacted with me as a filmmaker. And I'd say, I came away from a lot of these experiences thinking about how difficult the job is, how incredibly hard it is to be president, and how quickly all of us in the public are to vilify these people and just be negative and critical about everything that they do one way or the other. And the ones who I think have been the most successful are the ones who have figured out how to work in a bipartisan way and how to build consensus and how to really listen to the American people. So it has been my own history lesson putting all of this together. And the last little thing I'm going to share with you here is something new that we're doing. We started an oral history series, and this project goes back to Wisconsin's former governor, Patrick Lucey. Many of you will remember Pat Lucey, passed away a couple of years ago. But I had worked in the legislature here as a page back in my early days with a woman who I see on the screen here today. Her name is Sharon Cook. We were pages at the same time. And Sharon and I have stayed friends throughout this process, and she's been helpful to us on this oral history series as well. But we began about 10 years ago. I ran into Pat Lucey, and he was 92 years old at the time. And I realized this guy's got an amazing story. I mean, he was a third-party vice presidential candidate. He was ambassador to Mexico, a multi-term governor here in Wisconsin, ran the Democratic Party. Who is this guy and what makes him tick? So about 10 years ago, we interviewed him. We got grants from the Bader Foundation, and I think the principal grant was Bader. And we put together 20 hours of interviews with Governor Lucey. This past year, Dennis Dresang, former head of the La Follette Center in Madison, great friend, Dennis just released a new book called Pat Lucey in hardcover. It's out now, and he attributes the success of that book to the interviews that we conducted 10 years ago. The idea being that we covered things in our oral history that others had not covered. Mostly, in fact, it was the early years of Pat Lucey. So inspired by that, earlier this year, we decided to do something similar. And if you would, you can put up photos of the two recent interviews. We just, late in the year, early December, we completed an oral history with former Governor Walker. And you can change the slide. And we also finished a roughly 20-hour oral history with former Governor Doyle. So we've been working on this project throughout 2020. The first announcement of any kind is here today. The current interviews were funded by the Pettit Foundation and in association with MMAC's Educational Foundation. So my thanks to Margaret Lund and also to Tim Sheehy from MMAC for helping us in the process. We do have 3 more to come. That are already lined up. We will be doing another Wisconsin governor in 2021, and we now have commitments from several others around the US, including 2 former cabinet members from the Obama administration. So if all goes well, we'll be doing roughly 8 to 10 oral histories a year. And so I'll leave off there and throw it back to Mary and any questions that anybody might have. I'm sorry. There you go. Now I can hear you.
There we go. Okay, good. Well, thank you. You really have had the opportunity to talk to quite a few people, very interesting people, presidents and people near them. Do you have anything you want to say about a couple of the presidents we really didn't talk about, like Ford or Reagan? Any backstories, any particular perceptions and feelings you had?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick little bit. One of the hardest things I ever did in an interview environment was with Jimmy Carter. He took off his mic and started to walk away before I was finished. And I actually had to, I mean, he's the president, but he's unclipping his mic and walking away. And I was like, but wait, I'm not done. And so he did put his mic back on and came back and sat down. Walter Mondale in an interview for one of our films did the same thing. And a quick story on Mondale, I interviewed him for the Reagan presidency, and Carter said no. We had interviewed Carter twice before, but he said no to an interview for the film on Reagan. Mondale said yes because he had a new book out. And about halfway through the interview, you could tell he was tired of talking about Reagan, and he said, well, I think we're done here. And I said, well, I'd love to come back and talk to you about Gaylord Nelson at some point. And he put the mic back on and said, let's talk about Gaylord now. So he clearly had the time. He just was exhausted by the subject matter. Reagan was interesting because we interviewed him in California at his office in Century City. And it was 92, so he'd been out of office for a while. And he was having memory issues. So the interview itself was a little more difficult, and we wound up pivoting during that, and he wound up doing off teleprompter an introduction to the film instead of a sit-down interview for the film. Jerry Ford, I mean, you can't make this up, but the biggest oddity of that interview was we interviewed him in Palm Springs in a hotel suite that he had picked. And he walked into the room and all of our cameras and lights were set up. We had clearly created a little studio environment. And instead of walking toward that, he turned and walked directly into the wet bar. It was like, I thought Chevy Chase had showed up, but it was actually Jerry Ford. So they all have their nuances and their idiosyncrasies. But I will say in Ford's case, of all of the people that we interviewed for the film on Peale, he was the most scholarly and the most academic, and had a much more of a kind of he understood the history of that period, World War II up through the 1950s, and articulated it better than the others that we interviewed. The last one I'll mention quickly was Bush Sr. We interviewed Bush Sr. in the White House. And he conducted 2 interviews the day we were there. The other was with National Geographic. And those were the last 2 interviews that he conducted while in the White House. And the day we were there, he delayed us by about 7 hours because people who remember the politics at the time, we were still engaged in bombing Iraq. And so he was in the war room dealing with the no-fly zone bombings in Iraq, and we were sitting in the other parts of the White House twiddling our thumbs until he was available.
Okay. We had things to do, I guess. So what sense of did you get that Peale had on these men in particular?
Well, I'd have to say Peale was called a counselor to the presidents. He ministered to them directly. And the 2 that were the most outspoken about their relationship with him as a pastor were Nixon and Carter. Nixon, some people may remember, was a Quaker. Carter obviously was, an outspoken Christian all through his presidency. The others, I think the counsel would have been more like, historically, if you look back at presidencies, a lot of times they would counsel with a minister of their choice. Oftentimes it was Peale or Billy Graham prior to undertaking some kind of military action. So those who would have been perceived as more religious frequently would invite religious counsel either into the room, into the Oval, or on the phone prior to some kind of big incursion into another kind of conflict.
Madsen asks, on a lighter note, of the presidents you have interviewed, who had the best sense of humor?
Well, the one with the best sense of humor, and it's hard to say because they're all under time pressure all the time. So Clinton clearly, once he got the campaign buttons, didn't have anywhere else to go, and then he was a delight. But the one that I would say had the best sense of humor was Nixon. The one who was the most fun to sit and talk with by far was Nixon. Again, he too seemed limited in what he had to do that day. We were in his office, and I think we were the highlight of the schedule for the day. But he was funny and he was engaging, and so I probably took away more from him than I had some of the others.
Darren says, Chip, always fantastic to have you. Where can we go to stay up to date on your current projects?
Well, thank you for asking that. If you're on Facebook, just friend me on Facebook. That's the easiest way. The Reagan presidency we just released on Amazon prior to the election, so you can see the Reagan presidency series on Amazon. The current project, we're in the middle of a 4-part series called Magnificent Madness about a 1950 Italian sports car. And it's how could you do 4 hours on a sports car? It's fantastic. And it includes Ferdinand Porsche. So the best way to find out about that is our website, duncanentertainment.com, or the best is really Facebook. I'll go on and text and communicate with anyone. Or you can email me, chip@duncanentertainment.com.
Well, do we have any more questions coming in here? I don't think so. Hard to believe. This is usually a pretty chatty group, but you must have covered the bases pretty well here. So
we just got one from Phil.
We just got one in.
Yeah, happy
Bill
to be.
Valrath actually says, have you had any interviews with anyone in the Trump administration?
We have not so far, and it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out going forward. My guess is, or at least the way it sounds, he's teeing it up to run again. We'll see what tomorrow brings and what the protests are like in DC tomorrow with the certification. But it's a little too early to go after anyone in the administration for oral history work. We're looking at people from Obama and Bush administrations for that now. But I would assume at some point we would. There's certainly people I would love to interview.
When you say it's a little bit early to talk to someone in the Trump administration, what type of time frame do you typically look for before you start doing that?
If it's in the case of an oral history, I would say about 2 years until they land somewhere. So we know with the 2 Obama cabinet secretaries we have coming up, we know we're in the mix with a couple of former governors from other states who we're now talking to, and they're all people who've been out of office for more than 2 years. I think it gives them a little bit more time to reflect on their role in history and try to consider what their legacies might be. I mean, they're still active. Most of them are on boards. I know, for example, Governor Doyle's on a number of boards here in Wisconsin and still very active, politically very active in business, as is Scott Walker. So a couple of years. I think we got Walker at the right time, for example, this year. He was terrific too. And he and Governor Doyle both sat for about 20 hours.
Wonderful. Tom Gale says, thanks to artists, we know what buildings, clothing, and people looked like over the last 2,000 or so years. Documentarians like yourself give us a movie of history, unlike the snapshots of artists. So we owe a huge thanks to people like yourself. But unlike a Mike Wallace, for example, we don't get to hear your questions on the subject. Why have you chosen that interview style?
Well, that is a terrific question. I started in TV news in Madison at the NBC affiliate in 1980. And I really had no experience in journalism. My degree was in English. I had a second major in comm arts, but really didn't know much about TV news, didn't know much about filmmaking. And I wound up at that affiliate for 6 years, 3 years part-time, 3 years full-time. And I produced the news there for a couple of years, and everything we were doing was short form, 1-minute stories, 2-minute stories. And I became interested in long form documentary type projects. And as I was working on those more and more, I realized that my signature characteristic, if I have one, was listening, which you wouldn't know from this conversation necessarily, but listening and being able to build a narrative through interviews. So some people here may have seen our 2018 film, The First Patient, which is on iTunes and Amazon as well. And that's a great example. I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, watch The First Patient. And in that film, there's no narration of any kind. It's just the interviews, and they drive and build the story. And so from a technique perspective, I like going deep into the interview process and then building a narrative where the people who are the focus of our story tell their own story. I've never been particularly fond of being on camera, so that's part of it. But I think my skill set's more equipped for the interview process and letting them figure out a way to tell it.
Very good question, Tom, and great answer, Chip. What is the cost of doing a typical 1-hour documentary, asks Dan Federley, if there's a typical one?
Yeah, I think for a while, it was fairly predictable. I would say from the mid to late 90s, for about a 15-year period, it had a lot to do with technology. And so if you were shooting in high definition, the cost was greater than standard definition. If you had an original soundtrack versus canned music, it added to the cost. If you had a celebrity narrator, it was going to add to the cost. So today, I would say the average feature-length doc on a Showtime HBO type network is going to run somewhere between, on the low end, around $850,000 on up to about $1.5 million for a 60 to 75 minute film. The art, if you can do it with budgets, is to try and to be profitable, is to try and keep the budget as low as possible, but still within the parameters of what we call state of the art. So as an example, the first patient, which I mentioned, was all shot on 4K and released in 4K, which is now, if you have a standard def TV at home, everybody now is moved into 4K or 6K or 8K. And every time those numbers go up, it increases the cost. We've been very fortunate because we've worked in Milwaukee for such a long time. We have a very solid team. We work a lot with independent studios in Milwaukee. They do our sound, Randy Bobo and Steve Kulchin, and Peter Batchelder, who's a composer here in town. With that same team, he works with us a lot on original music. When we can, we use local talent. So I've worked a lot with Joe Hanreddy and Lee Ernst and people who were at the Rep for a long period of time. Laura Gordon's another one who's narrated some of our films. So we try to do as much as we can locally. And our current film series, this 4-part series, Magnificent Madness, there is a website, magnificentmadness.com. But in that series, we did all of our interviews were in Italy and Argentina. There's a Brazilian race journalist in it. So the film is in 4 different languages: English, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. And all the interviews were abroad, but the rest of the production was all literally within the confines of our office space. So graphics, everything, it's all local, and that helps keep the cost down as well. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Past President Steve Chevalier says, outstanding presentation, Chip. So thank you very much. And that's probably a very good note to close on, unless there's anyone that has a final question for Chip while he's here. Oh, here's one. For young people who think they may be interested in getting involved in filmmaking, how would you recommend they get started, asks Jenny Stefanich.
Well, if they're still in high school or younger, they already have a number of devices that they can play with at home, including their iPhone, which shoots 4K video and takes great stills. But the thing that I focus on most with young people is I encourage them, and they don't necessarily like hearing this, but I encourage them to read fiction and to learn to write. So if they're inclined to be a filmmaker, one of the easiest ways in is to be a good writer, because that's where we're missing talent. And also it's all about storytelling. So if it's a 3-act feature documentary, you got to be able to analyze what that means. What are the 3 acts? So again, on the first patient film we did, you as an audience member will have a very clear understanding of what that means when you see the film, the turning points, the plot points that drive it forward. And I learned all of that by majoring in English, not in film. I tell people all the time, at the very least, if you're interested in film, get an English degree, and then don't worry about production. I think I'm on the 15th or 16th edit system in my career. So I keep learning the new edit system whenever it comes out. But as a writer, it's all the same tools I started with. And they're not changing anytime soon.
Well, another great question and another great answer. So thank you again, Chip. And President Darren, I'm going to turn this back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Chip, thanks for being here. Fantastic presentation, big fan. Great way to start off our new Rotary year. So again, thank you for being here. In honor of leaders like yourself, Chip, who speak to our club members, we'll be making a donation in your name to the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all.
Thank you.
Absolutely. A few more announcements. I hope to see you at our snack program this Thursday at noon with our RCM scholars, Jose Uribe, Anthony Pittman, and Diana Gonzalez. I also hope that everyone had a healthy, happy holiday season, a happy new year, and thank you for being with us today. Next week, we will be hearing from Steve Alacara, founder of the Millennial Action Project. So join us for that next Tuesday. In case you missed it at the beginning of our program, Michelle will close our program today with our Rotary Now More Than Ever video series. So again, thank you all for being here. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
I think it's important to maintain my Rotary membership now more than ever because Rotary is an organization that is dedicated to helping people in the community. It's apolitical in nature, and it does good things to help citizens. And I think that what could be more important than having something that unites us in a period of really strong division in this country.
Membership is choice, right? Who do I want and choose to engage with? How can I contribute and be part of something bigger than myself?
Why I'm staying in Rotary and why I've stayed has evolved over the years, and I think the main aspect of that is I truly enjoy the fellowship. It's a great group of people. It's a bunch of community leaders that you would never have the opportunity to spend an hour with every Tuesday.
That sense you have in the room of people who want to be part of something that moves the world forward in a meaningful way, it really is impactful from the person to person and then also country to country.
Maintaining my Rotary membership today is more important than ever. What Rotary offers when it's not a pandemic, the value of Rotary is critical. The resources, the people brought together to connect together to provide value to our community is all the more important today than ever.
Rotary is like family, and you don't leave your family when times are tough. You do your part, and our part is paying our dues and staying as involved as we can right now during this pandemic.